Welcome into A to Z Sports Prime Time on this Wednesday evening. Lovely to have you guys here for another episode of the Prime Time Show. We are going to take a look at wide receiver fixes. You have not just an offensive line problem, but you need a little help at the wide receiver spot too. We are going to dive into that together. You're going to hear from Greg Cosell of NFL Films, and we'll see if we can't get this thing addressed. We will get to rising and falling at the end of the show. Who stock rose, who stock fell. Real simple. Stock up for the mustache. The mustache continues to improve by the day. We're looking forward to having a great show with you guys. And as always, it can be an even better show if you share this show around. So we invite you to do just that. If you're hanging out with us on Twitter, please retweet it in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on Facebook Live, you can share. You can share now to public. That is in the bottom left. And if you're on YouTube or on Twitch, please subscribe to the channel and tell a friend to do the same if you have done so already. Like the video while you're there too. We always need more likes on the videos, so go ahead and jump on in and do just that. Once you've done so, we can go ahead and get this thing started as more of you guys roll in. Welcome into A to Z Sports Prime Time from the Zen Sports Studios. I'm your host, Buck Rising. I am proud, as always, to be presented to you by the great folks at Zen Sports. Promo code ATOZTN gets you up to $1,000 on your no danger first wager in the Zen Sports app. And TrueMath Fitness, where you go for the best workout in Middle Tennessee. No workout ever recycled or repeated. Maximize your fitness goals with a new way to work out at TrueMathFitness.com. Wide receivers, plenty of them in free agency, even more so in the NFL draft. And it's not just an offensive line thing. You need corners, you need receivers, you need edge rushers, you need inside linebackers. You need a great many things because this roster is about to turn over in a big, big way. So as we look at the different ways that you can address this, as Kenneth Davidson said, wide receiver talk, let's go. Yes, this is a fun class, and Greg and I started to dive into the top end of it this morning, or rather earlier this afternoon, on the Install podcast, which is a part of the discussion that we're getting ready to have with you. So I'd like to start with your Two Rivers Ford take in the comment section. Where would you rank the Titans wide receiver room 1 to 32? I'll tell you who is in the Titans wide receiver room here in just a second for you to make that evaluation for yourself. I would tell you where I rank them here in just a moment, right after I remind you that your Two Rivers Ford take, because this is your Two Rivers Ford take, where would you rank the Titans wide receiver room, is presented by Two Rivers Ford. Speaking of Titans wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins is a part of the Two Rivers Ford team. He drives a truck from Two Rivers. I drive my Ford Explorer from Two Rivers. I love the customer service, quality American-made Ford vehicles, and all the great salespeople out there, the non-commissioned salespeople out there at Two Rivers Ford in Mount Juliet or online at tworiversford.com. How would you rank the Titans wide receiver room? Stephen King says 1 out of 32. He would go 34. So again, that Titans wide receiver room, as it is presently constructed, looks like this, your depth chart for the wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins, of course, is your leading receiver. You have Treylon Burks, Mason Kinsey, Colton Dowell, Kyle Phillips, and Kearis Jackson. Those are the only players under contract in the Titans wide receiver room. Of course, NWI is an unrestricted free agent. He's your second most reliable wide receiver. And Chris Moore, who is an unrestricted free agent as well, will hit the market at age 31. So that's what your wide receiver group looks like right now. It's not the best by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know if you feel the way that Steven does, where they're 34th out of 32. Chase says 30th. Brian says 32nd. BF says if FanDuel rates Will Levis 32 out of 32, then wide receiver rank is 32. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't really care about what the gambling outlet ranked your quarterback. You know, I see a lot of you butthurt about it on the internet. I'm sure Levis is probably butthurt about it because there's 5 rookies or 5 guys who haven't even been drafted into the league ranked ahead of Will Levis right now, which would probably piss anybody off. But, I don't think it's necessary to go get butt hurt about the FanDuel list. And anyway, that's why you should be betting with Zen Sports anyway, because FanDuel doesn't know what the hell it's talking about with quarterbacks. 31st for Aubrey Calvin is where he says the Titans wide receiver room is. 29th for Brent on Facebook Live. So it is an unimpressive collection of players. The most impressive player in the Titans wide receiver room is DeAndre Hopkins. Now, we know that DeAndre Hopkins is their saving grace because beyond that, they don't really have anything worth talking about. Kyle Phillips is a non-factor. Treylon Burks is a non-factor. Mason Kinsey is lucky to be here, just happy to be along for the ride. And Colton Dow, the former 7th-round pick, and Kyrus Jackson, fringe roster players playing for a new coach. And in the case of Kinsey and Phillips and Burks, guys who were brought in under a different general manager, this is basically, there are no rules for who you got to keep and who you got to cut. Now, Burks and Phillips are in all likelihood going to be on the roster this year. But they're not, you shouldn't look at them as a new coach just coming in here to salvage them. It's entirely possible that the new coaching staff looks around and be like, hey, Rand, how you feel about these wide receivers? Rand's going to look around and say, well, I didn't draft these wide receivers. Let's get some new ones. Okay, you're out. I think that's a completely feasible scenario to look at with a couple of guys who are sticking around. Chris Frazier says everyone is but D-Hop. I don't know what that means. Brent says, what's your number, Buck? Mike McCown says 39th. Some high schools have better receivers than the Titans, is what he is implying there. Stevie says, what about Roverson? Well, there is no such human being on the Titans roster. There was a Reggie Robertson a couple of years ago. I don't think Reggie Robertson has been around for quite some time, but there is no such Roverson. Again, the Titans wide receiver group, under contract. So this does not include Chris Moore and Nick Westbrook-Akina. Treylon Burks, D-Hop, Mason Kinsey, Kyle Phillips, Colton Dow, Kyrus Jackson. Those are currently what constitutes the Titans wide receiver group. Hopkins makes me not want to put them last because there are plenty of teams that don't have DeAndre Hopkins. I would struggle to put them any higher than 30th because Hop is 32, still a high-level player. Age is not going to impact him and his game the way that it could a lot of players at that position. He is on an expiring contract, though, which means he's not any kind of long-term solution, certainly with DeAndre Hopkins. So I would struggle to put them any higher than 30th. And that's probably sounds like a slight for Hopkins. I certainly don't intend it to come off that way. He's the first 1,000-yard wide receiver since A.J. Brown was here. He by far and away exceeded any kind of expectation that you could have held for him. He dispelled the notion of washed wide receivers coming to the Titans at the end of their careers here. He is not Andre Johnson. He is not, who's another name on that list? Randy Moss. He is not the best version of DeAndre Hopkins, but he's still a really, really good player. So with an addition in free agency, which we'll talk about, and with a draft pick, which we will also get into, this wide receiver group could look a lot different. Now, we said that as well last year, and the draft pick that they came away with was Colton Dow. And they were lucky that Hopkins, the situation played out the way that it was because maybe they knew they were really going to be the only team that put in a bet on him, but that's a pretty risky proposition for that almost to not have worked out. So with that being said, I think that I would say 30th max for the Titans wide receiver group. I would like to be surprised by Treylon Burks and Kyle Phillips. I'm very much in a wait and see type of mode. Those guys have to very much earn it. So let's talk about how you would correct the situation, whether that be via the draft or free agency. And on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch, we'll get to that here in just a second, right after I remind you that the Primetime Show is presented by Zen Sports. Download the app, plug in the promo code ATOZTN, get up to $1,000 on your no danger first wager. The Preds back in action tomorrow. You got Vandy just getting their asses kicked by Georgia right now. If you bet on the Indiana Hoosiers, I pity you because they're currently trailing by 20 at the half to Nebraska, which makes me want to self-harm. But self-harm is not what you will get when you bet with Zen Sports. Plug in the promo code ATOZTN up to $1,000 on that no danger first wager. Terms and conditions do apply. Gambling problem? Call the Tennessee Red Line, 1-800-889-9789. Must be 21 or up in Tennessee to bet. So how would you go about addressing the wide receiver situation? We need to go full Jags, overpay wide receivers because we suck, says Matt Stanley. So the Jags are a good test study for this. Trevor Lawrence's, I think that was Trevor Lawrence's rookie year when they gave Christian Kirk that contract. Everybody looked around. It was the same year that the Titans traded away A.J. Brown, same year that A.J. Brown got paid, same year that Tyreek Hill got paid, and said, wow, they're giving up how much for Christian Kirk? That's nuts. Now, Christian Kirk ends up being a really, really important player for that offense, and Doug Peterson makes him, I mean, you could argue whether he's outright worth the value or not, but Doug Peterson makes him a legitimate, viable wide receiver option that he really wasn't in Arizona. And that matters for the Jags. You could see how much worse their offense got after he was dealing with injury. Calvin Ridley, speaking of Jags wide receivers, is going to be available to be signed in the offseason. It doesn't look like Jacksonville is going to tag him. I haven't seen a single player get tagged just yet, though the tag window just opened yesterday. I like the idea of Calvin Ridley. T. Higgins, we'll see what happens if that's a tag and trade scenario that ends up manifesting itself. There are also some lesser expensive. We talked about Tyler Boyd, for example, familiarity with Brian Callahan's system and not quite the top of market value or top of market cost that you would have, and a veteran wide receiver who can come in and help the rest of the group learn the offense right away. There's options here. There's also the draft, which is the most interesting scenario because there's no predicting necessarily. It seems fairly obvious for the Titans to take a tackle at 7, but there's no guarantee that the Titans stick and pick at 7. There's no guarantee that the Titans take a tackle at 7. So as we basically wait for this draft to come about, all options for the most part should be on the table, save quarterback. You're not going to draft a quarterback that high when you already have capital invested in Will Levis, and Will Levis is the present, not the future, but the present. So you need to immediately make him better. What wide receivers might you be interested in this draft class? There's a ton, and Greg Cosell and I talked about 4 of the best ones today on the latest episode of the Install podcast. However, you would stack them. Malik Neighbors, the LSU wide receiver. LSU, a couple of wide receivers coming out this year. 6 foot, 200 is what they have him listed at on the official website for the Tigers. 89 receptions, just north of 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns on the year. Greg, if we start to get around the 7th overall pick, and I know the Titans need offensive line help, but I love the idea of Malik Neighbors in two-tone blue. What did you like from the tape?
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of people, as you know, Buck, I'm not a list guy, but people always ask me that. He would be my number 2 if I had to make a list.
Okay.
Again, another guy who I watched all his targets from both 2022 and 2023, and I really like Malik Neighbors. I mean, number 1, he can play outside and in the slot, a ton of experience, both, in both areas. I think he's got a complete receiver skill set. I mean, you wouldn't say that he's purely explosive, and I think that he needs to be a little more refined in his route running. At times, I felt like he relied exclusively on his physical ability to feed press and run routes, and needs a little more refined and subtle technique to manipulate corners. But that can be taught. But I really like this kid. I mean, he's really competitive. He's physical. There were times with his run after catch presence and aggressiveness and physicality, I thought of Deebo Samuel. He worked all 3 levels of the defense. He did show some body lean, some feints, things that he needs to continue to get better at, but it was there in his body. And I thought one of the things that's often overlooked, and I had a number of great conversations with the former Bengals and Ravens receiver, TJ Houshmandzadeh, about this. And he brought this to my attention. And as soon as he said it, it was, a light bulb went off in my head. And Neighbors, what he can do is he has the ability to stop on a dime. When you're a receiver and a corner for that matter, you need the ability to stop. Very often guys who are burners, and Neighbors doesn't fall into the burner category, but very often, the 4-3 guys, those guys, they struggle to stop. They're very fast in a straight line and they can run away from people, but they struggle to stop. And Neighbors was a master at being able to stop. And that's a very overlooked trait for a route runner.
Certainly. So Marvin Harrison Jr., that's Greg Cosell, by the way, of NFL Films. That's the podcast that Greg and I do every week. It's available in its entirety on 104.5 The Zone's YouTube channel. So while you're here or after you're done here with the Primetime Show, go ahead, jump over to 104.5 The Zone on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, and get the install and my radio show and all the radio shows on The Zone and all kinds of other clips and interviews and highlights when you hit the subscribe button there. A to Z Sports Primetime is presented by TrueMath Fitness in the Gulch. Go to TrueMathFitness.com for your first workout free as a Middle Tennessee resident. No workout ever recycled or repeated for the best version of you. A new way to work out for the best version of you. Go to TrueMathFitness.com for that first workout free today. Okay. There's a variety of different fixes here. Tighten Up Tony says Rome will be better in my opinion than Neighbors. Okay, well, those are just words. They don't mean anything. Cordy Jackson says that there are actually Cordy Jackson appears to be we won't be a wideout. It won't be a wideout number one. We need a left tackle with that number 7 pick is what he says. Well, if the left tackle that's left at 7 isn't the left tackle for you, then you don't have to pick a left tackle at 7. They have to fix the offensive line. The offensive line is the most important thing for them to address this offseason. But I'm not interested in overdrafting a player just because there happens to be a tackle at 7 that you could take. If you don't have the grade on him, then don't take him. If you do, great. Fix your offensive line and worry about the wide receivers. You've got depth at both positions to figure out something based on your draft board. Now, I don't know how, for example, Rand Carthon and his staff would have these wide receivers and tackles stacked. All I know is that there is a lot of love for Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., who's one of the better wide receiver prospects that we've seen in the last couple of years. And there are so many more names on down the list. Hell, Malik Neighbors isn't even the only LSU wide receiver coming out this year. Brian Johnson Jr. is somebody, Brian Thomas Jr. is somebody who is going to be talked about a lot. He's a more raw prospect. He's bigger, though, than Malik Neighbors, and there's going to be a lot of interesting wide receivers of all different sizes and shapes. Ladd McConkey. I don't know if Ladd McConkey is going to end up being a first-round pick out of Georgia. I would be surprised, but there's a lot to like about this dude. He's not some tiny little white slot receiver. This is a guy who, Greg and I talked about this today, reminds Greg of Cooper Kupp coming out of Eastern Washington. Doesn't mean that he's Cooper Kupp right away. Just means that he's got some similar traits that might lend itself to success in the right system. Puka Nacua, for example. There's all kinds of different wide receivers that you can go about getting. The question is, are you going to put them in position to succeed? And that's what the coaching staff is tasked with first and foremost. So how can we address the wide receiver situation for the Titans if you're the general manager or the front office staff? Well, the free agent crop is pretty plentiful. ESPN has their top 50 free agents and the best landing spots for them out right now. Hollywood Brown is somebody that was brought up for the Titans, and I think that as a skill set fit makes a lot of sense in principle. They also brought up Chidobe Awuzie, the corner, who makes sense for the Titans because you also need corner help too. So whether it's Hollywood Brown, whether it's Malik Neighbors, whether it's a draft pick to be named later or a lesser-known wide receiver that you bring in for depth, you're going to have options to be able to do this. The thing that you cannot allow is a situation like last year where you, as Rand said, I believe, roll the dice and play the board. Well, rolling the dice and playing the board is all well and good until you end up in the 7th round and your wide receiver solution is Colton Dowell. Before you have DeAndre Hopkins on the roster. They are perilously thin at the wide receiver spot. even with Hop, and they need to improve that depth and top-end talent right away. They got to do it at a lot of positions, but wide receiver is as important, almost as important, as the offensive line situation. BF says, Buck, don't forget about Brock Bowers at wide receiver. I mean, you could split him out wide like a wide receiver, but I don't know why some dude on Instagram was asking me about moving him permanently to wide receiver. Just because he doesn't have the size of like a Gronk yet doesn't mean once you get him in an NFL strength and conditioning program that he won't be able to improve those physical attributes. All right, so quickly, whose stock rose, whose stock fell this week in sports? That's how we'll wrap up the primetime show tonight. Let me know in the comment section on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. Tomorrow on the radio show, we'll be talking about a lot of these wide receiver options. We'll get into more about what Greg had to say, so make sure you're hanging out with us from 10 to 1 on 104.5 The Zone. While you guys tell me whose stock rose and whose stock fell, I'll remind you that the primetime program is made possible by the Ashton Real Estate Group of RE/MAX Advantage. Go to GaryAshton.com and get your dream address without the stress. Get the intel edge you need to succeed at GaryAshton.com. Okay, whose stock rose, whose stock fell? UConn laid a dud, says Cody Valentine. Yes, the number one ranked team in the country coming out of the gates and losing was unfortunate. NBA All-Star fell flat. Everything but the three-point contest between Steph and Sabrina Ionescu. Tough scene. According to FanDuel, Levis' stock apparently fell hard. Yeah, I mean, it's a stupid exercise that they've done, the FanDuel thing. But obviously it's going to create conversation, and they've done so successfully because the only way to engage Titans fans, the only way to really engage Titans fans is to piss them off because it's not a big fan base. And, you know, if there's not a lot of you, then you whack the beehive and you make things happen from time to time. But yeah, the FanDuel thing is dumb. That could use a rebound. Caitlin Clark, 96 points from the record, says Mike McCown. She might be my favorite college athlete of all time, Caitlin Clark. I wish that Nashville, I know we're getting ready to talk about baseball or the idea of baseball in Nashville. I would so much rather have a WNBA team if it meant that you could get Caitlin Clark here in Nashville. Can you imagine? That would be absolutely electric. She would immediately raise the profile of the team that she plays for, the value of the team that she plays for. And that's going to be really, really cool to see when she comes out. I assume she's going to come out this year, but you never know. Paige Beckers is going back at UConn, so we'll see what happens with the WNBA draft this year. Either way, speaking of things that the city of Nashville wants but are just really not real and outright gaslighting people, baseball is something that the city of Nashville wants, but baseball is not something that the city of Nashville can really, at this point, get.
Buried deep in this article, Jeff Passan writes, Music City Baseball recently contracted the real estate development company Mortensen to undertake a stadium site and market analysis, two integral pieces to any eventual presentation to the league. Okay. The final step, sources said, would be to secure a general partner who could help cover an expansion fee that, even adjusted for inflation, is expected to be nearly 10 times what Diamondbacks and Rays ownership paid in 1998. We're right there, right? We're at the finish line.
The final step.
That's the final step is billions of dollars. That's like telling somebody, yeah, I'm getting married. Oh, congrats. I haven't met her yet. Haven't met her. Haven't dated anyone. Haven't proposed.
It's not even like I matched on Hinge with this girl.
Nope.
This feels like the one. This one that I'm getting ready to go out on the blind date with.
Nope. You could say, I'd like to get married. I would love to meet somebody that is the one and get married one day. That's what Music City Baseball is doing right now. They're looking for the one. But it hasn't happened yet.
They're the small child that's imagining what their wedding day might look like one day. They've made a scrapbook. They've made a scrapbook for their future wedding, right? A Pinterest page even.
That is the equivalent of this to me. A notification popping up of MLB to Nashville and saying, well, the last step is to find somebody to pony up billions of dollars is like texting all your friends, guys, I'm getting married. Well, I haven't met the girl, but it'll happen maybe one day down the road, years from now, hopefully.
So baseball in Nashville is not real until you have money, and nobody's ponying up for the team. It's going to be a privately funded stadium, to hear the mayor of Nashville tell it. So baseball in Nashville is not real. Eric Alonso says, Buck, you're bugging. We would rather have the WNBA over MLB. Yeah, I'm good with the sounds. Like, I don't give a shit about baseball, guys. Baseball's never mattered in my life at all. I'm a way bigger basketball fan and no matter what kind of basketball fan it is, than baseball. And I live downtown. I live right by the Sound Stadium. It's like a mile. It's not unwalkable from my house. So like, why do I need more than the 4 or 5 Sounds games I go to a year? First Horizon Park is perfect. It's a perfect setup. It's the perfect amount of baseball for me to not actually pay attention to. And for me to go and drink the frozen Jack Daniel's slushies in the outfield at the bandbox. It's perfect. So, yeah, we have baseball here as far as I'm concerned. The Sounds are great. Braves, there's way too many Braves fans to try and make that a successful thing out the gate. There's no actual money for baseball in Nashville to make that a viable option. There's no land deal for baseball in Nashville. So without any of those things, baseball in Nashville is not real. And if you're giving me the option between the two, I'm going to say, yeah, the Sounds are plenty baseball enough for me, and give me a basketball team. Now, would I prefer an NBA team? Sure. I would trade the Preds in a heartbeat for the Grizzlies because I'm a basketball fan. But in the absence of an NBA team coming to Nashville, then I'll take a WNBA team. I'm all for it. Let's go. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. All I know is until there's money with baseball, that's not a thing. All right, that's going to do it for us tonight. We appreciate you guys hanging out here with us on the Primetime Show. Radio tomorrow from 10 to 1 on 104.5 The Zone. We'll dive into more draft prospects. We will get you ready for the NFL Combine because I'm heading up there. I think I'm going to be there from Tuesday to Friday at this point based on the schedule. So we'll have a lot of Combine and draft prospect discussion for you. So come hang out with us on 104.5 The Zone from 10 to 1. Brandon says, how about Nashville focuses on having a winning football team first? Yeah, well, they've been trying to screw around with that for 25 years. My attention span is short. It's the team that I cover, but, they've had plenty of cracks at this thing. Focus on winning football. They can only do so much, and they've had 25 years to figure it out and still haven't done it consistently successful yet. Doesn't mean they can't. Just means they haven't. All right. That's going to do it for us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow on 104.5 The Zone.
This is our Colts. This is our team. We bleed blue. This is our Colts. Whether win or lose, we love them. For the shoe, beat the Titans. Let the world hear us now. This is our team. Go Colts.